Welcome, everybody. We are here again. It's been a whole year. I'm still stuck in this room, but this time I'm joined with some amazing people. We have this panel, which is Horror in Media. This is Virtual HorrorCon, brought to you by Drive-Thru RPG and Astral Tabletop, as well as Gehenna Gaming. I'm Mark Q. Anderson. I'm the VP of Marketing for Gehenna Gaming, as well as the co-founder, but I'm not that important. I have some more important people here to talk about horror in media and what that means. We'll get into it, but first I want to do a little round robin, a little introduction. Josephine, why don't you introduce yourself?
Gosh, I'm first, and anyone who's ever seen me do anything knows I'm horrible at introducing myself. Hi, I'm Josephine McAdam. I'm on various tabletop shows you may have watched, like LA by Night and other things, and am an actor in also horror films and other non-horror films as well that you can find on IMDb.
I am so sorry for putting you on the spot, and I'm immediately reminded of when you first start working at a place or when you go to school and they have you stand up, introduce yourself, and tell everybody one interesting thing about you.
I'm just horrible at it. We could continue.
I am too. Don't feel bad. I'm just saying I feel your pain. Matthew Dawkins, hello. I can't hear you.
Hello again. There we go. My mouse is deciding to fail me tonight. Yeah, good to be here. I guess you want to know who I am and what I'm doing here.
I mean, yes, if you would like.
So I am a tabletop RPG developer and writer, as well as writing for board games and video games. But predominantly I work in the TTRPG sphere. I am an in-house developer at Onyx Path Publishing, one of the co-sponsors of Virtual HorrorCon, and the conceptual designer and developer and the like of games like They Came From Beneath the Sea behind me, as well as having a fairly close attachment to Vampire the Masquerade over the last decade, I guess. I've worked on most of the V5 products that have come out by now, which has been joyous. And yeah, very pleased to be here.
It's great to have you, and thank you so much for joining us. Michael Parker.
Hi.
Hi. It's fantastic to have you. Why don't you introduce yourself?
Thanks. My name is Michael Barker. Pretty much everyone here calls me Barker, so you can all do the same. I am a writer / developer for Absolute Tabletop and Onyx Path Publishing, and I'm super honored to be here. This is the imposter syndrome is very real, and the coolest thing about these panels, other than being invited to sit in on one, is being able to learn from all the other panelists, and that's what I'm looking forward to the most.
Well, I'm looking forward to that as well. I like to consider myself a little bit of a cultural vampire of information. I live vicariously through everybody else's successes. Speaking of which, David Castro, you and I are friends on Twitter, and I've been wanting to bring you onto something for quite a while, and thank you so much for being a part of this panel.
No problem. My name is David Castro. I am a relatively new tabletop RPG writer. I've done a bunch of work on Onyx Path, Scion. I do a lot of D&D 5e stuff, and I'm just happy to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have all of you, and what we're going to be talking about is a little complicated. It's a little deep. It's a little historic. We're talking about horror and media, and what the hell does that mean, right? Because we're living in 2021, so media is kind of a weird term now. We're kind of living in this weird transmedia, post-media era. So I guess probably the best way to start this conversation is to probably start from the beginning, to talk about the early consumption of horror and what that means to you as an individual from when you were a child and as you grew older and cut your teeth on horror, and kind of what your early impressions on what horror meant to you from an early age?
Well, I'll just wade right in.
There you go.
Yeah. This is my way. So yeah, introductions to horror. So my initial introduction to horror was by accident. Whenever I used to come home from school, my parents had recorded an episode of a program called Nightmare for me, which was very popular in Britain in the early 90s. It was like a VR dungeon crawl game for kids. And they had recorded an episode of Nightmare, and they had recorded it on the same videotape as a movie called Don't Look Now, which is a fantastic movie, but not really suitable for 6 or 7-year-olds. Unfortunately, they had failed to rewind the video, so when I put it in to watch my show, I got the last 5 minutes of Don't Look Now, which has a very shocking sequence of a little lady in a red coat stabbing Donald Sutherland in the neck. Spoilers. I think the statute of limitations on that movie have kind of passed by now, and it gave me nightmares for weeks and weeks and weeks. The shock of this, and yet it also enticed me. The idea of stabbing Donald Sutherland, and it made me ask my parents, what kind of movie was that? What kind of film was that? And they told me. And admittedly, I was very young, but they started allowing me to watch slightly more adult things, PG, and then 12 certificate, probably before I was old enough to do so. My sister, who was older than me, would always rent videos from the store, like It, and really bad B-movie horrors as well, because whatever was available down our local shop was basically what you could rent. And so I saw some very low budget stuff, but that became my genre. It was the thing I loved. It was the kind of movie I talked about when I was at school. And so by the time I was at secondary school, high school in American terms, I was watching, The Shining. I was watching Dawn of the Dead. I was watching Friday the 13th, Halloween. If there was ever a late night movie on Channel 4, which tended to be the alternative viewing in the UK, it would generally be horror, and I would watch it every single week. And yeah, haven't really let go of the horror genre ever since then.
It's interesting. There's certain things that kind of burn into your brain early when you're a kid, and you kind of carry that. First, it scares the hell out of you, and then you find it very, very compelling. It's dangerous. It's whatever compels you early on, and that's the kind of thing that threads you through the media that you're consuming. I'm wondering, kind of for our other panelists here, for you, Josephine, Barker, and David, what is it that was an early image or an early scene or an early movie that like both scared you but also made you go, "Ooh, what is this?"
I can go.
Oh yeah, go for it.
I watched the Silence of the Lambs probably way too early, something like 11, 12. And then I found out there were books, so I read all of those. And one of the first novels I can recall enjoying a lot was the Andromeda Strain by Michael. And
Great movie.
so that sort of, so that sort of formed my thing. But I was always like that, like weird goth kid. I was in what was 8th grade, and everybody had to do like a book thesis, and mine was on the Inferno. So like that was sort of the literature side of everything that I enjoyed, that got me to this place where I'm doing this for cash now.
Interesting. So it's like a film and literature kind of intertwined. I love that. What about you, Josephine?
So Here's the weirdest thing most people learn about me is that I don't watch horror. I I don't watch horror. I've never been in a haunted house. I am terrified so quickly, and things stay with me. I'm very sensitive, I guess. It'll stay with me for weeks, months, like really stay with me, like immobilizing fear.
Yeah.
However, I acted in haunted houses for 4 years when I was in high school and college. And I have all the first indie films I did were all horror, and I am still doing horror films. And it is all around me. Like all of the people that are closest to me are huge horror fans, but it's very well known that like I cannot. I can't even watch a documentary about night terrors. I was crying at South by Southwest in the room and had to walk out because I was like, I can do this. I can do this for a film festival. I can watch things, and I can't.
That was a spooky documentary, though. I know which one you're talking about. The one with the pillow on the poster.
I don't know. It's I don't remember. I had to
Blank
wipe that away. But I love the aesthetic, and I love I love making horror films. I love anything in the genre world. And so it's so interesting because I feel like there's this big scope that horror spans, but it's not so different to me than other genre films because it's just about presenting the unexpected and shifting the tone and the aesthetic slightly to that. But I just, yeah, early on, I have memories of accidentally glimpsing, like, is it 28 days later, 28 weeks? I don't know. I just heard the audio alone. I was in the room next door while my parents watched it, and I was like,
yeah,
I was traumatized just from listening to the audio of it, and I had to like put on headphones. And yes, it's very odd. I think most people think that I am just like through and through know everything about films growing up or anything like that, but it's the exact opposite. But I like coming in with no prior knowledge and no preconceived notion about what horror needs to be. And so I like that.
I think it's super common though. Like I like listening to the director's commentary and actor's commentary of movies. I like watching kind of behind the scenes stuff and little interviews about horror movies, right? And the amount of times I've heard actors who appear in some of my favorite and scariest horror movies go, "Oh yeah, I don't really dig horror that much. I'm just a damn good actor, and I just really like the way that I can express myself in certain ways that's more 3 to 4 dimensional in a horror movie that you typically would be a little more toned down in any other movie. Also, I can scream well."
Yeah, I like horror. I love the whole world around it and the
Yeah.
entire aesthetic and everyone that like
Yep.
and I like reading the scripts and everything. I just have an inability to be okay
Yeah.
watching it.
Yeah, especially with like this creepy imagery and the jump scare and all of that stuff. It's super, super common. And I find that really, really interesting that the fans of horror and the creators of horror do have similarities, but at the same time, there are some very interesting major differences. Barker, I'd like to get an understanding of kind of where like your horror background came from, as far as what impressed upon you at an early age, or in the start of your horror obsession or lack
Sure.
thereof.
Sure. Yeah, I was never really exposed to lots of horror by my family beyond the opening scene of Law and Order that I was allowed to watch before I had to go to bed, which was the closest I got to horror for a long time. Lenny Briscoe finding a body in a dumpster. But my sisters, I grew up with 2 sisters, and they're 6 years older than me. So when I was like 8, they were 14, and they were able to rent a bunch of horror movies for like a birthday slumber party. And like there were stupid, like Matthew, you said, the B movie type thing. There was one with a guy, the killer, he had an electric guitar with a drill on the end of it, and he was killing people with a drill. I swear that movie exists. I need to know what the title is, so I don't have the chat for the Twitch in front of me, but you get 1 XP if you post it there.
I think it's a trauma movie. It sounds like it might be.
it was like kind of a musical. Like he would do this guitar solo and sing and then stab someone through the heart with this drill and there'd be blood everywhere. It was
As
awesome.
one does.
Yeah.
The Exorcist though was in that pile of movies that my sisters rented. And I remember my mom letting me watch it and the scene came on. And I know that means different things for different people, but for me it's the scene. And I turned to my mom and I said, "Can you stop it?" Because it, like Josephine had said, it's like this residue that I felt sticking to me. I closed my eyes and I kept seeing it.
Yeah.
I kept hearing it. And so she stopped it and then I like took a breath and I was like, "Thank you." And then I kind of just sat there for a minute and she pressed play again. like I was ready to go. And that is what stuck with me until Wes Craven's Scream. The knife, that image of the knife airborne and the sounds and the horror of time, realizing that Drew Barrymore's character's parents are just there.
Yeah.
They're so close. That inevitability, that's what sticks with me when it comes to horror. And I'm getting like sweats thinking about it right now.
I think that resonates with me as well, just because I was afraid a lot when I was a kid. I was afraid of everything, and movies scared the hell out of me. I mean, even dumb movies that aren't supposed to be scary would scare me, and I would have night terrors and nightmares, and it's awful. And then somehow down the line, I think I just went through a period of obsessively exposing myself to as many horror movies as possible. Exorcist being one of those early movies. And that whole like imprinting on your brain, you close your eyes, you still see her face and the voice. It's scary. I mean, even now thinking about it, I can put myself back in that feeling of being a kid and watching it and being afraid. And I think with Scream, it highlights. Obviously, it's a funny movie, but it highlights the vulnerability of children, teenagers, and adults when it comes to horrifying things that are actually happening in juxtaposition with a theme of horror. And I find that really, really compelling and really interesting. I guess a question I would ask everybody is where does that preoccupation of horror come from in whatever subgenre, whether it be supernatural or murder, or I mean creatures, even aliens. Like, where does our preoccupation of horror come from? Because it's long standing and it's never going away.
Well, some psychologists will tell you that it comes from the desire to. It's the same reason people ride roller coasters. It's the idea that being scared makes you feel more alive for a moment, because it connects you to your feeling of mortality. I don't know whether that's the case for me. I guess that's a very stock answer for why people gravitate toward horror as a medium. For me, as a creative, the reason I go for horror is a fairly simple and a bit mercenary one. And it's because I like when I write games, or when I write anything or run a game, I like to provoke some kind of emotion from my audience, from my players. And honestly, fear is one of the easiest. And again, speaking for myself, but I love evoking emotions of genuine joy or sadness from players. But those are far more nuanced emotions, and getting those genuine feelings out of people often takes several sessions of a game, for instance, because you have to get a certain amount of investment into your characters. But if you're just looking for scares, there's obviously lots of different types of scares and lots of different types of fear, but I think it's a fairly simple thing to get it out of people without it being a cheap jump scare. So yeah, I've got my motives for always dabbling in horror, but yeah, I think the psychological assumption is that people pursue horror because it makes them feel more alive for a moment. At least that's what I've read.
Yeah, I think also it's for me what what I think is interesting, because you're saying those other emotions are so nuanced, is that I don't think that you can have good fear or horror without joy and happiness and beauty, because none of that, it's not really scary if you didn't care for the thing in the first place that's being taken or that's being put at risk or in this precarious position. So for me, that's the most compelling part, is that if everything is dark all the time, then nothing is dark, because it's just relative
Absolutely.
to whatever's around it. And so for me, it's just that you make these people care so much that when they are at peril or in this precarious situation, that it's all consuming. And so especially as an actor, like, that's just such a great emotional connection to a character and to what they're going through. And yeah, I love that aspect of it, that it goes hand in hand with like every other emotion. I feel like every positive emotion that you don't necessarily associate with horror.
Yeah, I think that connects deeply with the idea of the sublime, especially when you're talking about in art. I don't remember what the artist is, but there's a painting of a man standing on the rocks with this huge wave that's about to basically come and destroy everything. And there's something not just beautiful about the scene, but also very interesting about this guy, right? He becomes ascended into this kind of I don't know, transcended, beautiful person who is ready to face whatever, even though you know that there's doom and his fate is uncertain. And I think when we're seeing those characters go through those things, we resonate with them as kind of archetypes of ourselves, and we're ascending ourselves in kind of this feeling of being a kind of hero, or at least a survivor, and saying, life is tough, but if this were happening, I would definitely be able to get through this, and I will definitely, be fine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, David.
And at least for me personally, it's less about trying to feel alive and more like it allows, at least me personally, to like deal with like thoughts I have, things I've dealt with, stuff I've seen, or like things I'm personally frightened of in a controlled setting where like I know the rules, I know the like off ramps. Let's scare myself and the other people at my table. And that's just sort of how I've always seen it. I do a lot of like cosmic horror stuff, and just a lot of. I'm more of a fan of this is sort of a thing you can't escape. This is a thing that you have to like withstand and survive, and it's less about can you defeat this thing and more about if you can survive it and like what you'll become at the end of it. So I like a lot of like post-apocalyptic stuff, a lot of cosmic stuff, and I think that for at least a lot of people I've spoken to, there's a lot of let me sort of like dilute my own fear and sort of deal with it that way. And I think that's really interesting.
Side note, the psychology interested me because I cannot do roller coasters at all either.
Yeah, it's because it puts you in a feeling of
either
of being, oh my God, I'm gonna sit in this thing, and it's almost a simulation of death, which I don't mind.
I'm gonna
coasters.
die. I'm gonna die. Yeah, which I don't want to feel regularly.
Yeah. Yeah, you're gonna put yourself in that like stress point. I'm also really worried that roller coasters will break in the middle of them. Like I will be the like random situation where
I think I'll slide out.
Yeah, yeah.
You'll be the seat that comes unbuckled.
I will be on the news.
Yeah,
I will be on the news.
It's interesting though. Go ahead.
No, please. I want to hear what you have to say.
Well, it's fear. You'll probably hear a lot of this weekend, but fear is, many will say an evolutionary trait, right? It keeps us alive. And so by going to see movies and playing Fatal Frame or whatever, what was the PT, right? Playing any video game that strikes this fear in our hearts, it's kind of like dosing. it's kind of like dosing ourselves with something that is meant to protect us, but it really applies to what you were saying, David, about that controlled setting, right? That's the seatbelt on the roller coaster. It's really weird.
I have a theory on that. And I don't know, this could be completely unfounded. It's not really based on anything except for my own personal experience of talking to other people as well about horror and kind of the things that they're into. But I have a theory that the preoccupation with horror sometimes comes from a place of trauma, or at the very least, the wanting or needing to, I guess, work through trauma that is kind of long-standing. So by dosing yourself with these little bits of horror, there's a way that you kind of go, okay, it's like a little bit of the poison that helps you improve yourself, or at least put things into perspective, or somehow rehash certain things that are subconscious and not as in front.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, sorry.
No, go for it.
It's like, well, they survived it too. So I can, if they did, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and not just horror, but I feel like this with most genre in general is that, you know, in creating films and creating content within it, for me, it is usually about telling a story that is not at face value exactly what you are going through, but that can put things into a metaphorical or more like digestible situation, watching someone else and seeing those hardships, and you get to interlace stories or trauma or these concepts within the film in a less in a more subtle way than perhaps a straight film or like a drama, you know, will present itself. It makes it easier to digest, even though it seems silly with horror, but it does, because you're packaging it in a different, you know, costume or dressing.
I think that kind of leads us to a subject I also wanted to bring up as well, is the costuming of genres and the palatability and digestibility, I guess, socially of certain genres. Horror has unfortunately, it's a little bit of a problem child genre, has been through the years on how it should be handled. Oftentimes it is the victim, the genre is a victim of certain decency laws. But not just decency laws on what's okay to film, what's okay to write, what's not okay to write, what's, you know, okay to show, but also, I guess, socially, kind of over a period of time, was horrifying and totally unacceptable, from like a gore standpoint, for example. In one period of time, it has shifted and changed. And even when you're talking to people who go, okay, what's your favorite genre of movie? And if someone goes horror, a lot of people go, oh, you're one of those. Right. And even, you know, you kind of, I don't know if anybody else has experienced this, if they're a big horror hound, you kind of downplay how much you like, yeah, I like other movies too. So it's not, you know, seem like a psychopath. But I'm wondering what that, you know, how do you think that will change in the future? I mean, we all know kind of how it's been through the past, but in relation to, you know, how horror has changed and what has been okay, what lines have been pushed with this genre, what do you think the future brings when it comes to, I guess, acceptability of horror genres as a legitimate form of media?
Well, I think horror is always a reflection of society.
Mm-hmm.
I guess any director or screenwriter worth a damn is usually trying to convey some kind of thought or message, and it isn't just killing for killing's sake. And so, you know, you look at something, I mentioned Dawn of the Dead earlier. Dawn of the Dead is one of the best zombie movies of all time, but it's also a complete, I guess, metaphor for consumerism, mass consumerism, and police brutality, and the nuclear family. All of this is wrapped up in a 1978 movie because that was very much what the topic of the time was. And I suppose you look at the torture porn genre of the early 2000s, when the Hostels and Saw movies and so on was getting popular. And there's on one hand, it's just because special effects have moved on, visual effects have moved on, but it's also because we as viewers have become more accustomed to that sort of reality TV era where villains are a little less comical. I know there is a puppet on a bike or a trike in that movie, but it also has a very Big Brother, the TV series feel to them. Those sorts of Saw movies. It's very voyeuristic. And of course, then you have lots of found footage movies, and because we all have access to digital cameras, and so on and so on. So in terms of where things are going, really, we just kind of have to look at where we are outside of horror. And so, there'll probably be lots of movies about infection coming up. In fact, you can already see lots of TV series about that on Netflix.
There's
Most of them.
many.
A lot of them from East Asia right now. I am sure there will be more and more coming from Europe and America. But
I want to talk about that for a second, though, because Josephine, I'm sure as an actress, you probably get a bit. Do you are
scripts?
You
yes,
get like billions of scripts coming in about this?
I'm not reading for them so much, but I know a lot of directors are getting given a lot of pandemic scripts right now.
Yeah, I don't know. How do you feel? How does everyone feel? How do you feel about that? Like the
pandemic because you film in advance, right? Right now, not really into doing that.
Right.
Currently.
Right.
I could see how after the fact,
it's a little
maybe, but right now I'm like, don't really want to play in that right now, but
yeah, it's that's interesting, and I think that it's a really interesting point that Matthew you're making is that right now the pandemic is topically relevant. Just like not too long ago, the political spectrum was something that was horrifying.
But whether that makes horror more acceptable or not, I would hazard a guess that probably not. Because horror, it's always going to have its audience, but it's never going to become mainstream, more mainstream than it already is, in my view, largely because if you've got a 100% audience slice, not every single one person in that audience wants to see this dark reflection of reality on TV. People want romantic comedies, and they want things where they have pure escapism and they aren't being shown it's the seedy underbelly of their real lives, skewed slightly to make it a horror. And so, I can't. I say this, I'm stuttering over my words somewhat, but yes, horror is more acceptable now than it probably was in the 60s and 70s. And obviously there's all kinds of censorship rows that come up every now and then with the video nasty era, as it's called over here, and sort of Mary Whitehouse and things like that. But it's but these things come and go. I can't imagine it's ever going to be the kind of family viewing. Most families aren't going to sit around and watch a horror. Most families.
I hope not.
See, I somewhat disagree. I see with perhaps not film, but still film. One of the biggest films of a couple years ago was Get Out. One of the biggest TV shows on TV was The Walking Dead. The most popular podcasts out there are either like True Crime or like Welcome to Night Vale, The Magnus Archives, Limetown. I listen to 35 different podcasts. Like 2/3 of them are that sort of thing, and I can only see that growing. Maybe it's not like get the family and the kids to go see us, but most people go see it. They just brought back the Twilight Zone.
Yeah.
I mean, like, I feel like it's not quite there yet, but it is taking great strides towards it.
Yeah, and I'm wondering if that's I'm wondering that what you're talking about is almost happened with music, right? We're kind of living in a post-genre era when it comes to music. At a certain point, I mean, you still have your big tentpoles, but there are a lot of artists that are, integrating different genres into their whatever album they're working on. It's almost even hard to pin certain artists down on one genre, right? And I'm wondering if maybe that's kind of what's happening with film and television as well, where Breaking Bad kind of comes to mind, probably just because I watched that entire series with my wife recently. And the show is funny and also emotionally heartbreaking and horrifying. And there are definite bits of even torture porn scenes that are kind of introduced in there. And I'm wondering if maybe what we're seeing is that because horror is so dynamic, it is going to be kind of integrated in other genres as well.
I think one of the biggest things there in the film TV industry is that horror has such a wide berth. So the majority, like the amount of horror getting made and marketed to other countries of the world specifically that have huge markets, I mean, it is constant. So in the film world, it's seen very much like these are like quick, like manufactured quick, just like there's a formula, repeatable formats, but that's not necessarily what you see on the forefront or like some of the best horror films out there. And how we define horror is, like you said, so immensely broad. Like by all means, I think like The Handmaid's Tale is horrific.
Yeah.
But people don't define that as horror. And so I think it just depends on how you define it. And I think people, because there's so much volume of this very like follows a formula, easily marketed, easily consumed, like sort of you just throw it on and not think too much about it. There's a lot of those made. And so it kind of takes over what people's conception of horror is, even though it's so much broader and so much wider than that and covers everything. I mean, even like you're saying, like even in video games and films that are not marketed as horror, they almost always have horrific moments within them.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and that's interesting too, that video games as I mean, I'm a fan of Silent Hill. Barker, you mentioned Fatal Frame earlier. Yes. But I don't play video games so much anymore, unfortunately, probably because I'm so busy and I just have fallen off of playing video games and I wish I could get back into it. But there are games that are new and big and huge and very popular that do either have horrifying scenes or are kind of sit in some subgenre of horror in and of themselves. And I think that when you're talking about a dynamic transmedia outlet, video games is probably going to be the best place to push that limit when it comes to horror.
Yeah, and Barker, you've
I just wanted to say, yep, that's all I wanted to say.
And
I'll say it again. Yep.
It's a big 10-4.
But yeah, well, I mean, you constantly see the evolution of horror in video games as well, and I know it's very much the mainstream, but the Resident Evil series is a big example of a license that kind of bore itself into the ground, retreading zombies and getting more and more urban fantasy like with it, which isn't a bad thing. It just wasn't necessarily meeting its target audience, shall we say. Yeah. And then with the latest couple of Resident Evils, including the one that's upcoming, they have turned things a little more folksy. They have gotten a bit more psychological with their brand of horror, which is very interesting to see. And then you see an awful lot of indie games. Obviously, Steam is full of these kinds of things that really tap into micro ideas, those subgenres of horror that you were mentioning earlier, Mark. That there are all kinds of stripes, and you can, whether it's just a visual novel that you're playing through for some chills, there's a lot of World of Darkness visual novels out there now, and the sort of choose your own adventure types that are still horror and cater to the audience in a completely different way. Visual novels were very popular again in East Asia as video games for quite a long time, but for whatever reason it's taken a long time for that to really become sort of vogue over in Europe and America, but now it seems they are. Horror keeps evolving, thankfully.
I've sorry, Josephine, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to jump in and answer some of because I see in relation people asking about like what makes a horror film less expensive to film, why is this so easily? And the truth of it is, and I don't mean this in any negative way, is that people are willing to watch horror with lower standard of effects or costumes or acting per se than almost any other genre where they would just refuse to watch it. They're still consumed because it's part of the fun of it. It's been marketed. And it is also, I think, what hurts the connotation, right? Because like I said, it's this wide range, but so much of what gets made is in that lower tier because it's easy to market, it's easy to sell. They make back most of their money on a very low budget. So it's just, it creates lots of content and keeps it going forever and ever, but it also, I think, hurts it in a way, hurts other anything venturing outside of that or wanting to invest a higher budget or invest a higher production time. They're usually produced very quickly, quick turnarounds as well. And so you see that go, and that's not to say that that's worse. You can like whatever you like, but it's the same way I think that it is within the industry. Those films that are churned out are seen the same way that sort of reality TV can be seen versus anything else. Some people are very against it, but it's extremely popular.
I think it's that the productization, which I both love because there's certain aspects of some of that, like quick and dirty, cheap horror movies from the 80s are some of my absolute favorites. Barker, you mentioned that movie. Someone actually called out the name of the movie with the guitar and the drill at the end of it, called Slumber Party Massacre 2, which is one of those quick and dirty. The second one, not the first. It's one of those quick and dirty. But I love those types of movies, and even movies that are made now that are with a shoestring budget and with really bad acting and bombastic effects that aren't exactly the most expensive.
Like one of the best ones I've seen, It Follows.
Oh my gosh!
It's just some dude who is just happens to be like nude and following you. That can't have cost all that much, but it's effective. Some of the games I've played, you mentioned visual novels, or someone did. Theater Club, where you can just, by changing the background music for like a split second, can like evoke that sort of like dread. I'm here going, all right, well, this said that this is not intended for like children, but it's like, oh, cute and fun. And I'm like, where's the drop though? When does the thing happen when this becomes scary? And that in and of itself is terrifying. There's just a lot of interesting things that you can do like that, where like even before you get to the spooky thing, if you know it's coming, that is spooky in and of itself.
Yeah, the suspense. And one of the other cheaper aspects is, as an actor, you always know that no matter what the scary thing is on the other side, it's your reaction that's going to sell it, and whether or not the audience is also scared. You don't have to even show it at all. If someone can convey the horror well enough, your mind will make up probably something so much worse than actually seeing it anyway.
I have actually an example.
So often.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. so often, it's actually worse when you show it, because anything in my brain will be so much more terrifying than anything you can put on that screen. I call it the like picture of Dorian Gray thing. Never
Yeah.
show the picture, because it doesn't matter how awesome your picture is in your movie. It's not as awesome as the thing I've made up in my brain.
Yeah, there's a movie, a series of movies that was directed by an awful human being. But it's a horror movie that's beloved by some people, and it's called Jeepers Creepers, and it's an interesting movie. I enjoy the movie, but it details the oops, we showed too much kind of effect that you're talking about, because throughout the entire movie you're not really getting quite a forefront visual look at what the monster is. And it's really creepy and it's scary and it's, oh my god, this is so frightening. And then by the time they show the creature, you're like, oh, okay. Well, it kind of diffuses all of the imaginary monstrous details that you've kind of filled in yourself.
Mm-hmm.
I
Same with
feel
like-
I was
Go ahead.
I feel like I would be remiss not to talk about one of the other reasons that it's had this perhaps not being taken as seriously in some manner is that you've got this high volume of quickly produced films being put out, and a lot of them deal on stereotypes.
Yeah,
very strongly so. Like you maybe not some of the, again, have taken the time, higher budget productions that some of us have, and they may not have a higher budget, but people that take longer in the writing pre-production phase in assessing the script and what stereotypes you are including and what potentially harmful portrayals. And so I think that has held back a lot, is that actors, anyone in a marginalized group, like seeing these sort of stereotypes played out over and over and over again can be a deterrent. I know, especially as an actress, like so many of the horror scripts that come across my way, I'm like, I'm not playing that person. I would never do that. I don't want to put that out into the world anymore. And that has nothing to do with horror, but just the writing that has been okayed time and time and time again that keeps it perpetuated. And so it's just, that harms it a lot more than anything else. And I think that is changing. I mean, because that's across all media, but you see it a lot because of the quick production time.
Mm-hmm.
But
and yeah. I think I would almost argue that maybe a big part of why it's changing is because people like yourself and others that are just saying, I did look at it and it's not only extremely offensive, I think that we can do better. So it's just not for me. And I think that sentiment is becoming more and more prevalent. And I think it's important. I mean, it's hard, especially because probably the tropes that you're talking about with like the damsel in distress thing is kind of old and tired of the helpless woman. Like that stuff is so ingrained in misogyny and old ways of thinking that it just looks bizarre now in a modern context.
It also helps that there are more of the like people from those marginalized like groups out here making the content now.
Yeah.
And are aware of all of these things because they've seen it and they've lived it. And like, I know that I'm not gonna put certain things in because I find it distasteful, because I've had those things like described to me.
Yeah.
You know?
And you mentioned Get Out and Jordan Peele and his production company, Monkey's Paw, I think it's called.
Yeah.
Which is, has been putting out amazing movies, amazing content with developers, creators, actors, directors that are people of color and that have, or from marginalized groups that have something very, very interesting to say. And I love that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we have about 7 minutes left. I'm looking at the time and I'm like, oh no, I want to have this conversation for like another 2 hours, because talking to you about this is Nick keeps messaging me. He's like, oh my god, this subject is so important to me, and I think this subject is important to everybody.
I could talk forever about it.
Yeah, and you know,
Mhm.
there are literal college classes on this. So here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna have each one of you tell me a few things. Number one, what is the one piece of horror that you would recommend that everybody check out right after this panel? Two, what do you have coming up next, and where can people follow you?
Don't make me go first.
I won't. Matthew Dawkins,
Okay.
you go first this time.
Oh, okay. Right. So, first piece of horror that I would get people to check out after this panel, if they weren't otherwise engaged with Virtual HorrorCon, of course, because this is going to be the place to be this weekend, would probably be, if it's not too self-serving, of course, I would say they should go and back They Came From Beyond the Grave on backer kits, because you can still pre-order it on there. And the art is all coming in for that, and I think it's one of the best horror role-playing games that perfectly condenses what's great about Hammer horror and 1970s exploitation. Nevertheless, if you want to engage with some horror media that is immediately available, I don't think you can ever go wrong with, as I have extolled its virtues several times on other podcasts, watching a movie called The Stepfather, starring Terry O'Quinn as a slasher who is also a stepfather. It's got a very TV movie feel to it now, but it is a fantastic, it's a masterclass in subtle acting, chameleon-like acting. And Terry O'Quinn is an actor who is most well known probably for appearing on Lost, among various other TV shows. But Stepfather is a brilliant horror movie that no one really talks about anymore. In terms of what I've got coming up next, do check out, if you like more urban fantasy, if you like history, we have Victorian Mage the Ascension. So Victorian Mage, available on Indiegogo at Onyx Path from the Tuesday coming. And we're using Indiegogo for the first time. We're very excited about that, and I'm really happy with what we've written for Victorian Mage. It is the perfect era for Mage the Ascension, in my opinion, and really does help turn the setting on its head a bit while staying true to its roots. So yeah, that would be me.
Beautiful. Barker, what piece of horror media would you recommend to people look at and Google right after this panel? What do you have coming up, and where can people find you?
Oh my gosh. Is anyone else ready to go? I'm sorry. I'm having so much
I'm ready to
trouble.
go.
I'll wing it.
okay.
Okay, go, David. David, take the torch.
David, it's your turn.
Okay, so the number one thing that I think people should go check out right now is a podcast called the Magnus Archives. It's like, for the first couple of seasons, anthology horror done by the great people at Rusty Quill. There's 5 seasons. They're on their 5th and final season now, so this would be a great time to go and just binge it when you're not doing stuff at the con. What I have coming up next, the Kickstarter for Scion 2nd Edition Dragon just ended. I wrote some stuff for that book. I'm super excited about it. It was actually my first book for Onyx Path, but because of production stuff, it's the second book coming out, or no, third book coming out, because Scartlands happened already. Despite it being my first Onyx Path book, and you can follow me at the Inked Knight on Twitter.
Great. Excellent. All right, Josephine, what do you think?
I am going to challenge the idea of horror as one strict genre and argue that horror is literally everywhere and anywhere around us, and say Schindler's List is what I would say.
I love that movie so much.
Yes, and one of the most horrifying events in human history. So
Yep.
I think constitutes a lot of horror. I get a lot of the same feelings.
Yeah.
And coming up, let's see. Oh, right now we're in season 2 of Eclipse, which is a dark horror sci-fi tabletop RPG show using the Mothership system. Our first season is up on YouTube, and it's only 6 episodes per season, so easier than most to catch up on. Our first season is very horror heavy. We leaned in a lot on post-production in our sound cues and sound design and everything. And our second season is currently happening. Our season finale is next week. And for this season, all of our music has been live scored by someone, like alongside in the call by Stargrave. And that has been amazing. But this season it definitely has a lot of comedy in it because we cannot help but be very silly when we're all together. But yeah, Eclipse, and as always, check out LA by Night. It is on YouTube as well, on Geek and Sundry and World of Darkness. And I've got 2 films on Shudder right now. The Mortuary Collection and Scare Package. Both of them are horror anthologies. Very different feels to both. They're both horror, but one of them is a lot more campy and plays into a lot of horror tropes, and that's Scare Package. And the Mortuary Collection is a lot more stylized and has one single through line. I'd compare it more to like Trick or Treat or that kind of film. Yeah.
Excellent. And Barker, you're up, my friend.
I'm going to go ahead and say Slumber Party Massacre 2 is the one film that you should look up, watch immediately.
I'm definitely going to do that.
You should. And you know what? That's just going to be my final answer. Because the hottest take I have is that horror is going away and that we're going to be left with the shock value of something like a Paranormal Activity film where everything happens at the end, or these beautiful character portraits that are kind of disguised as horror films, like the Haunting shows and whatnot, where it's not really horror, but kind of like what Josephine said, it's in everything. And it's also, that's a horror movie, might not horrify someone in particular. So I'm usually wrong about every prediction I make, though. So rest easy, horror fans.
So if people want to find your hot takes about horror and anything else, and where can they find you, and what do you have coming up next?
They can find me at Inspire the Barks on Twitter, and Absolute Tabletop is where they can just discover all of the books, horror and otherwise, that we are coming out with. And the next thing that we have is it's not horror, but the Mecha Hack Mission Manual is successfully funded on Kickstarter, and we're really excited to put that out and get it into people's hands. So thanks for asking, and thanks for tuning in. Excellent.
Yeah, thank you everybody for joining. I'm Mark U. Anderson. You can find me on Twitter at Marchosius with 5s instead of S's. Go follow Gehenna Gaming. Keep yourself locked into this Twitch account while we're doing all sorts of interesting panels like this one throughout the entire weekend. I would actually, before I start promoting things, I'm going to suggest that everybody go and subscribe to Shudder, because not only can you find Josephine's movie anthologies, but you can also find one of my favorite things of all time, Bob Briggs. He is amazing. I've been watching him for years. And he's in Scare Package. Is he really? Stop it.
He's in my segment.
Oh, that's amazing. So he's great because he will, the movies are great, but in between there's like little commercial breaks, and he talks about kind of what goes in the craft of film, the craft of horror, and everything in between. So if you like these types of conversations, definitely watch. I think it's called The Last Drive-In with Bob Briggs. I
love Shudder.
Yeah. I just got it just for that, and I've been just binging on horror lately. If you like horror, if you like Silent Hill, 7:30 p.m. tonight on this channel, I'm going to be running Cult Divinity Lost Silent Hill. Nice. And actually, I'm sorry, on this channel, 8 o'clock is going to be the Magnus Archives run by Ian E. Muller. I'm actually going to be on the Carrying Comfort Studios Twitch running Cult Divinity Lost Silent Hill. So go check virtualhorrorcon.com. Check out all the schedules. Keep playing games.
Get 2 screens, watch both.
Well, yeah, put it on all your screens. And I think, Josephine, I want to thank you because I think you just came up with the tagline for this segment. Horror is everywhere. Have a good night, everybody.
Sweet dreams.
This is the